So I live in Illinois, and I've posted about other haunted locations before, such as Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, but one of my friends and I were discussing an experience we had in the woods, and we're kind of looking for some answers. So, the first event happened in late August of 2016 while we were running late one night. We both ran cross-country and track in high school, and still do to this day. My friend worked a job that wouldn't get out sometimes until 10 or 11 at night, so we would typically go running very late at night. But this had been happening for a couple of years at that point, so we knew our path pretty well, and on the local running path, down 2.5 blocks, into the woods that butt up against a large creek. At some points on the path in the woods you can see houses and a park, but other times it starts to get a bit more secluded. But we aren't talking like the wilderness here though. But there is wildlife in the area, mostly raccoons, skunks, too many close calls there, a random beaver and the occasional deer and whatnot. And over the years we've seen more and more coyotes around the streets too, but never in the woods. But given our location, there isn't a local bear or wolf population as well, and this is pretty critical details to the story. Anyway, we meet to go running one night around 11:15 or 11:30 or something, and I'm not entirely sure of the exact time, but it was pretty late and thunderstorms were on the way according to the weather app. For this reason, both of us left our phones in the car. It was the one time we have, and we both regretted it ever since, and decided to run pretty fast to make it back before the storm. In the woods, it's mostly a wood chip trail until it gets to about 200 meters from our turnaround spot, a water pumping station as the town has had flood problems recently, and at that point it turns to asphalt. We run to the turnaround spot and start running back, and this was about a quarter of a mile from the wood chips to the turnaround and back. I would estimate it took around 2 to 3 minutes, given a slight stop at our turnaround. On our way back though, we noticed what we can only describe to this day as an upside-down trash can with a fuzzy or blurred outline in the middle of the path, right before it transitions into wood chips. If I had to guess, I would say about 3 to 4 feet tall, perhaps on the shorter side. Again, I need to stress that this was only 2 or 3 minutes after we had just run by and come back to that exact spot, and this thing just appeared there in that short time period. We stopped running as this was obviously rather peculiar and not there when we first ran by, but continued just kind of walking closer at a slow pace. We thought maybe someone moved something in front of us as a prank, as the only people that frequent the woods other than us at the time are teenagers smoking or drinking, but they're loud and can be heard from pretty far away. But this thing was completely dead silent, and we continued to get closer until we were about 50 feet away, and then it started to move. And when I say move, I mean that it was standing still, but it was as if it was swaying a part of its body completely left and then completely right. We had seen a red glare on either side when it turned its head too, like a lit end of a cigarette or something when someone inhales. Not a very bright glow, but enough to be seen in the pitch black, as there are no lights in that area. Talking between us, we began to become pretty uneasy at this point, as this was unlike any person or animal behavior that we had ever seen. This thing made no sound, and we were worried it was some sort of dangerous animal, so we started backing up slowly, and then we just made a run for it, and it didn't follow us, but stayed in its place, moving in the same manner. We ran as fast as we could back to my car, and we actually drove over to this thing, arriving approximately 25 to 30 minutes later as the storm started to come in. No rain, just lightning. But, looking around, we found no trace of it whatsoever. No broken branches in the woods, no footprints, nothing that would lead you to believe a large creature in the woods visited us. Neither of us could explain it, and after failing to find any more evidence, we just kind of tucked it away. Fast forward to the end of December that year though, and we're on another run, one of our first at night since the incident, and we got to the pumping station, and we found a disturbing sight. We found what appeared to be a dead deer leg lodged into the chain link fence, pretty much completely picked clean with the exception of some skin and hair and the hooves at the bottom. The whole thing was intact from thigh to hoof. Shortly afterwards, I decided to bring a different friend to these woods who has the ability to see spirits or something. I've mentioned him in other stories before, and I wanted to see if he could discover anything. As we walked by the spot, we saw the trash can, and he was startled and focused towards the woods. I asked him what he saw, and without telling him any other information prior to our arrival, besides having some sort of experience here, he described a cloaked figure around the same height as what I saw, with beady red eyes just staring us down. He said that once it noticed that he could see it, it ran away quickly into the woods. Now obviously, I take everything my friend says with a grain of salt, but in the week afterwards, my running friend was back on the trail, only to discover multiple other bones that we believed to be missing parts to the dead deer. He first discovered a spinal column with rib ends just laying in the grass next to the pavement in the woods. He carefully moved it to be with the other deer leg to keep track of them all in one place. 3 days later, in the exact same spot, he discovered what appeared to be a neck vertebrae, and then a few days after that, in the exact same spot again, he discovered another bone, one which we don't know what part of the body it came from. Now, at first we were thinking it was just a wild animal when we experienced this creature the first time, but these other occurrences are leading us to believe that there's something else going on in these woods. Does anyone have any explanation for what may have happened here? I can't find any answers, and I'm desperate for any info whatsoever. Oh, and one more thing too. There was also a forest access to the creek as well, and me and a different friend were recording a video there one time when we heard this odd scream in the background when we were reviewing the footage. We were obviously both pretty startled as we hadn't heard anything in real life, and it was only picked up on the video. But here's the video if you guys are interested.
Guys, let's go.
Okay.
It was Sunday afternoon, and my boyfriend and I had just got home from a weekend camping trip. We unpacked quickly, and we went to the shower right away before we had to leave for work. I anxiously kept unpacking everything, and hated the fact that I'd be alone in the house until around 11 p.m. when he got back home. Our house is old and creepy, and kind of secluded too. But after he left, it was my turn in the shower, and I always made sure to shower when it was light outside so I wouldn't be as paranoid about every noise. I got out of the shower, wrapped my hair in a towel, and threw my housecoat on. Laying on my bed, I was just playing on my phone, and I heard the front door handle jiggling loudly. I waited for a moment and heard the front door jiggle more aggressively again. Feeling irritated, I immediately assumed my boyfriend forgot his work keys or house keys or phone or something and had to turn back, meaning that he was going to be late for work. I got off the bed annoyed and went to open the door for him, and when I got to the door, I saw a strange man staring back at me through the window. He was holding the door handle and turning it, and we made eye contact, and his eyes went wide, and he just took off running, and I ran to the back door to make sure it was locked, and I grabbed my phone and frantically checked every window to see if the man ran to the backyard. We don't have any fences, and we live in a wooded area. I couldn't see him or find him anywhere, and at the time I didn't know if he came because he knew that I was home alone or if he'd been watching the house and saw that it had been empty the past few days or something. Either way, I grabbed my car keys, scooped up the dog, and I just got the F out of there. About a month ago, I moved into a house near the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. It's very secluded. Everything was great though up until about a week ago, I'd say, when just some strange things started happening. Not like paranormal strange, just strange in general. So I knew moving in that I would have about 1 acre to myself, which is nice. The acre itself is just about all thick, dense woods. But towards the back, you can't even go any deeper because the land is too rigid and the trees just block a clear path of sight into anything. Now, I live alone in this tiny house at the moment. My brother and his dog are moving in a couple of weeks. But the house is pretty small and it has a basement with a sliding door to the backyard, which has a little tiny pickety fence that could be knocked down completely if someone was to, let's just say, blow on it. I decided I'd start fixing it up, though, for my brother's dog until he becomes well trained enough to know when to come back home and stuff. And this is when the first creepy thing happened. I left to go to Lowe's to just buy some basic wood for a fence, just enough to make sure the dog couldn't leap over it if he tried, and as I was coming back home, I noticed a man on my doorstep, looking inside my house through the side window. Even though any person could have heard me pulling into the driveway, he didn't even flinch at all, even when I slammed the car door shut. Eventually, at this point, I kind of uneasily said, "Can I help you?" To which the man replied, "I'm just your neighbor and I wanted to say hello." I went out of my way to put the wood that I was carrying in my hand down on the ground and went to shake his hand, and he didn't even move again. He just stared at my hand. After this weird encounter, I was more of just done with him, so I said that I was very busy because I was fixing my fence and that it was nice to meet him. He stayed at the front of my house for about another 2 minutes, just watching me put all my wood inside the living room of my house, looking into and around my house in the process. Creeped out at this point, I just kind of closed the door in his face and went about my business. About 2 days later, into fixing my fence, another woman, this one looking nicer and putting a little bit of effort into her appearance, she kindly greeted me and told me about herself. Now, Mrs. H was just explaining how people don't normally move around here, and I was the first in about 11 years or so. She went on to explain that the rest of my neighbours whom I knew were around, and that most of them liked to just stay to themselves. After a pleasant talk with Mrs. H, I asked her about the man from 2 days ago. Now, this guy was about 6 feet, old but not too old, probably mid-50s if I had to guess. Brown eyes and in decent shape, and had some grey hairs. Mrs. H went on to explain that the person who lived here before me was a widow, and her teenage daughter, who she homeschooled, had left because this perv started to stalk her daughter. More stuff like that was said, and she eventually left, and that was just pretty much that. Last night, though, I heard tapping on my window at exactly 2:37 a.m. I know this because I looked at my clock. Now, my window is a good 4 feet above the actual ground below it, and I figured it was just a bird or something, so I went back to bed. Not less than 2 minutes after the silence, the tapping became 3 really loud bangs, and immediately I ran to the closet and grabbed my hunting rifle and hid behind my bed. Peeking over, I saw a figure looking into it, though, and after being scared half to death for 30 seconds, the familiar voice of that perv shouted, "I need your help." Not knowing what to do, I threw my curtain open, and the only thing between his forehead and my 22 was the half-an-inch thick glass of my window. And then he didn't say a word. Not, "Please don't shoot," not, "I still need help." Just nothing. And then he pointed behind him to the fence that I was building. I went outside to see what he wanted, and this time, with a gun on me, I said, "What's wrong?" and he said nothing but pointed to my fence again. I looked, and I saw that the fence had seemed to be run over by a car or something, with mud tracks just stopping then and being reversed into the grass. I looked at this guy's car, of which the tires were dirty and had tracks coming from my backyard, and I was pretty upset at what I saw, and I yelled at him, "What the hell, man?" and then put my finger on the trigger of the 22, to which he replied, "Your fence." And then he got back in his car and just left. All the while, I still had the 22 pointed at him. It's currently 3 p.m. on March the 2nd, and I've scraped the entire fence idea out of sheer exhaustion and, to be honest, fear. This has all really happened, and is currently happening, and I'll keep you guys updated with the situation, but I haven't contacted the police yet because I don't know if he meant to run into my fence or not, or if it was an accident or what. But either way, I have no idea why he was in my driveway, let alone on my property. So, this happened earlier today at work and has honestly just left me shook. Probably not overly scary, but it was certainly enough to freak me out. So, I work at a well-known funeral home in DFW, the Texas area, as a secretary and PBX operator. I answer all the incoming phone calls and direct them to the right apartment. I do everything from answering general questions to death certificates and obituaries. Overall, I work in a very vague position and I have a lot of knowledge of the industry. We get prank calls every once in a while, but most calls are genuine, no matter how odd or creepy the call might be. I get calls from family members who have just lost someone or someone who is going to pass soon or something, so that being said, I'm pretty immune to the weird call vibe by now. That being said, here it goes. So I answer a call with, "Thank you for calling, my name is so-and-so, how can I assist you?" I waited for the caller to reply and an elderly croaky man's voice chimed in on the other end. "Yes, miss, I was hoping to ask you a question." I took note that the person sounded a bit mentally handicapped, which isn't something too abnormal for my line of business. "Yes, sir, I would be happy to assist you today. What's your question?" I say. He says, "Miss, can you understand me? I'm sorry, I was in a car accident some years ago which left me unable to communicate properly sometimes." "Oh, yes, sir, I can understand you just fine." "Very good, I was hoping you could help answer some questions I had." "I'll try my best, sir. If not, I'll get you to the appropriate person." He then says, "Well, even though I was in a car accident and it disabled me greatly, I would like to medically preserve my brain when I die. Is this a service you offer?" I was obviously a bit put off by the question. Well, I know some famous people have done something like this. The science just isn't there yet for there to be a good reason. So I tell him, "Unfortunately, sir, there isn't a service we offer with that. You might want to try contacting the medical examiner. They might have some more information." He says, "Oh, well, I know that I'd like to do this for me and my children and such. Does anyone there have any more information on this?" I say, "No, sir. Unfortunately, no one here would have any kind of information on that. Again, you might want to try the medical examiner's office." I was honestly a little bit creeped out at this point, but it wasn't beyond anything that I've ever handled before, but this is where it started getting pretty freaky. He says, "Well, miss, I think you should look into this because I'd like to do this to keep my brain and my children's brains around in a jar or container of some sort. I would also like to keep yours as well, to preserve your life for me to watch when I please." I was dumbstruck by this. Sure, we get prank callers, but you can feel those are a bunch of goofy people just trying to play jokes. You know that they're fake, be it tone or how they talk or something. But this guy was full on serious about keeping my brain in a jar for him to observe. I could feel his sincerity. I caught my breath and tried to remain professional and not lose my cool and hang up on him. For all I know, he could be suffering from Alzheimer's or something. So I say, "Thank you for your consideration, sir." He says, "Of course, miss. I'll contact the medical examiner's office. Thank you so much for your time." I say thank you, but he cuts me off, and he says, "We'll speak again about your brain." And then he hangs up. I hung up the phone pretty slowly and just found myself kind of trembling. I spoke to my friend about it, and the best way to describe how I felt was this. Do you remember the first time you ever watched a scary movie? How you knew there weren't monsters in the closet, but you still checked? How you knew that there weren't monsters under the bed, but you still kept your toes under the blanket? How it takes years to get rid of the fear that just shouldn't be there, these irrational but primal fears. Well, that's exactly how this felt. Rewind this time to year 2002. I was in a residential nationwide high school, which is in Washington, D.C., and everyone knows that D.C., or any other major city, it can be dangerous. I was invited to visit one of my friends' home for spring break. I met with some local students, boys, and all of them were pretty cute. They invited me on a night out with them, and one of the boys borrowed his mum's van, but wanted to go cruising around Phoenix and show me the sights. I was the only girl in the group of boys, and there were 9 of us hunkered down in an old Dodge white van. But one of the guys had a brilliant idea of doing drive-by egg throws at some point, so they got eggs and kept the van door open as they tossed eggs at pedestrians. This actually wasn't what got us in trouble, and after all of our dozen eggs were tossed, we shut the van door and were getting ready to go home. And this is when things went down. So, I was sitting in the back of the van and we were at a red light. Then a silver Honda Accord that pulled up alongside us. I saw 2 men in the car just kept looking at us. And immediately, one of them rolled down the window and actually showed his gun and was saying something that we couldn't understand. The light turned green and the boy driving his mother's van tried unsuccessfully to dart ahead or even dodge, and that wasn't happening with 9 high school students in the van. We were chased by the silver Honda Accord and we tried slowing down and speeding up, making quick turns, but there was no luck. Their Honda Accord was easily able to keep up, and it wasn't helping that the streets were empty at this hour. We ended up accidentally cornering ourselves in when we pulled into a water reservoir entrance that had a dead end. 2 guys came out of their Honda, the headlights shining into our eyes, and they both had guns. They had 2 each as well, and were using bandanas on their shaved heads. They were surprised by how many people came out of the van, and even more surprised that we were all deaf and were signing. They realized that we weren't throwing up gang signs at them, and then they just said, "My bad," and they just left. Being deaf saved my life that night. About a week ago, a dispatcher who had answered multiple calls from the residents did a ride-along with me and talked me into taking him to the house. He had read every post that I had made here, so he was up to date with the latest spooky stuff going on there. And wanting to see some creepy stuff, as he put it, we waited until around 3 a.m. before going. At first, I was going to walk him to the front of the house, take a look, and then just head back. But that wasn't enough for him. We walked up to the porch and saw old hymnals laying open on the floor, just outside of the front door, which hadn't been there the last time that I was there. Walking into the house, I checked the spot where I had put the pack of cigarettes, and they were still there, unopened, covered in dust, and in the exact place that I had left them. Having someone there with me, I started feeling a little bit brave, so I tried to recreate the circumstances when I heard the footsteps upstairs. I walked under the stairs and into the back room, and nada. I showed him the nope stairs, and wouldn't you know it, we climbed up, and there were old newspapers all over the floor. A very old mattress was on the floor, which had folded over itself in the master bedroom. It actually looked like it was covering something, so we flipped it over, and to our relief, there wasn't anything under it. But a few seconds after that, the creepy stuff began. Downstairs, we heard a very loud noise, and it sounded like someone had a large stick and was dragging it across the wall or something. I'm not sure how long it lasted, but it felt like an unnaturally long time. We looked at each other, and I could tell by his expression that we had heard the same thing. We went back downstairs and looked in each room, but found nothing that could have made the sound. We checked around the house thinking that there might have been a limb that had fallen, but again, nothing that could have made the sound. Deciding that we had had enough paranormal activity for the night, we started walking back down the trail. Just like my first night, I felt something was following us, and before I could say anything, I saw the dispatcher quickly look behind him, and he said that he felt like someone was behind us. I don't know why I keep going back, but I feel like if I keep antagonizing whatever is there, it's going to be a bad day at some point. I know in previous discussions that everything from demons to squatters has been proposed, but with everything that's happened up to this point, It's getting harder to dismiss the supernatural here.